I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hello, I'm Constitutional Attorney Katherine Henry. Welcome to this week's Constitution segment recap. It is Constitution Thursday, of course, and as I mentioned, this is our Constitution segment recap of our Restore Freedom Weekly episode, where we had an interview with a candidate for Michigan Attorney General. This is just a simple recap. We had a 2-hour conversation on Tuesday. So to hear that full discussion of the sources we talked about, those constitutional provisions, laws, court rules, you name it, you can get the full episode on episode number 16 on our social media channels. This week, we started off the conversation with that state attorney general candidate by asking the true or false question that we posted on Tuesday morning on our social media. True or false, a prosecutor has the responsibility of a minister of justice and not simply that of an advocate. This responsibility carries with it specific obligations to see that the defendant is accorded procedural justice and that guilt is decided upon the basis of the sufficient evidence. So, of course, as we posted earlier this week, our options were whether it was true regardless of whether the defendant has his or her own attorney, the prosecutor has the duty to ensure the defendant is accorded procedural justice. Or was it false? The prosecutor owes no duty to the defendant, as it is just the defendant's attorney who has that job of protecting the defendant's interests. Of course, the answer was true. Regardless of whether the defendant has his or her own attorney, the prosecutor has the duty to ensure the defendant is accorded procedural justice. We then took a look at the prosecutor's duties. Of course, the Michigan Attorney General is the lead prosecutor for the entire state. And Michigan court rules, or the Michigan Rules of Professional Conduct, Rule 3.8, is entitled Special Responsibilities of a Prosecutor. And especially those first 4 sections, it talks about what those affirmative obligations that a prosecutor has in every criminal case. Those remaining sections are good to look at too, but they weren't as relevant to the topics we talked about today, so I didn't reproduce those here. But I did want to draw your attention to the official comment to this rule. We can see that here I essentially copied word for word out of this comment to create the true or false question for this week. So it's important to take a look at that. So the official comment continues on and it talks about the additional obligations that a prosecutor has, not just as an attorney in a courtroom, but by virtue of being a prosecutor, those additional responsibilities that a prosecutor has to a defendant. Also, in regard to a prosecutor's duties, we need to look at Michigan Rule of Professional Conduct 5.3, the responsibility regarding non-lawyer assistance, and the official comment for that rule, which talks about here that it's the prosecutor's job to use reasonable efforts to ensure that a defendant's rights are protected. And that means even, law enforcement or investigators or whomever that either officially work underneath the prosecutor or are working at the direction of a prosecutor. Criminal defendants' rights. Well, there's a lot, but we discuss those in a variety of respects, and they are summarized here. A criminal defendant has the right to equal protection of the law, to due process of the law, to privacy from government. There are certain criminal trial rights, as well as prohibitions or protections against cruel and unusual punishment, and prohibitions against bills of attainder. And of course, those sections are all itemized for you here, where you can find those in the US and in the Michigan constitutions. We also talked about in this interview the constitutional oath of office, which finds its requirements in the state constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and in state law. So what happens when an official doesn't take the constitutional oath? Well, we only very briefly touched on this because we already gone through of a discussion, but MCL 201.3 tells us that every office is vacant. It becomes vacant upon several different conditions, but one being the office holder's refusal or neglect to take their oath of office. If you read further, the law tells us that those vacancies are filled by an appointment, not an election. MCL 201.31 says that elective or appointive state offices are filled by selection of the governor, and MCL 201.35 that tells us that elective or appointive county offices are filled by selection of the probate judge, county clerk, and prosecuting attorney working together to make that selection. We had a full, robust discussion for over 2 hours about these issues and a few more. Of course, this was just that recap to give you those segments when you didn't have a chance to write them down the other day. So if you want more information, here is the link to watch the full episode. If you also wanted to just get information about Ryan, contacting him, asking him additional questions that you'd like to know his answer to with regard to the Constitution, state law, or any of the topics, here is his website. I thank you for joining us today for this very brief, probably the briefest of them all, constitutional segment recap. This is week 16 of Restore Freedom Weekly, and I'm constitutional attorney Katherine Henry. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow as we discuss the freedom fighting tools, Saturday, where we discuss this week's Restore Freedom goodie, Sunday for a biblical insight on this week's topic, and of course, next week, as we start all over again, having our Restore Freedom Weekly full episode, which airs at noon on Tuesday on our Rumble, YouTube, and Facebook platforms, as well as being posted later on some other platforms that we're venturing out to. So thank you so much for joining us and for partnering in this fight for freedom. Have an absolutely wonderful day.